Hi, this is Dr. Bhavna Pandey, and the title for my today's lecture is Introduction to Organizational Behavior. Now, in this lecture, we will cover topics like what is an organization, who are managers, what is their function and role in an organization, why are interpersonal skills important at the workplace, what is organizational behavior, and what are the different disciplines that have contributed to the development of this field and the emergence of OB as a field of study. Now, before we understand what is organizational behavior, let us first understand what is an organization. Now, as you can see on the slide, an organization is a consciously coordinated social unit composed of two or more people that function on a relatively continuous basis to achieve a common goal or set of goals. Now, this definition has some key features. Firstly, the organization is a collection of human beings who are interacting with each other in an organized way. And secondly, the members of the organization, they have a common sense of purpose. They have a common goal to achieve. Now, the organization can be a manufacturing unit or it can be a service firm. Schools, hospitals, churches, military units, retail stores, police department, or a local and state government agency are also called organizations. So organizations are not some building. It is not some center made up of physical walls, or it is not necessarily a government registered entity. For example, you have any religious congregation, a charitable work, or a union of workers. They are also called organizations. Now, there are people who oversee the activities of others and are responsible for attaining the goals of the organization. These people are called managers. There are certain functions that these managers perform. Now, here the functions have been condensed into four main types. First and foremost is the planning function. Now, this function entails setting goals, setting the objectives of the organization. What is its mission, its vision? Now, when this is clear, then managers have to formulate strategies. They have to devise comprehensive plans in order to integrate and coordinate the activities of the organization. Now, once the objectives, the goals are clear, the managers have to engage in the task of organizing. This particular function, it determines how tasks are to be grouped together. What functions will the different departments carry out? How will these tasks be done? Who will do these tasks? Who will report to whom? Where will the decisions be made? Thirdly, the leading function. Now, the manager is responsible or he's required to motivate his people, direct their activities in the right direction, make or select effective communication channels, resolve conflicts if there are any amongst the members. So when he is doing all these things, he is engaging himself or he is doing the leading task. Lastly, the controlling function. Now, to ensure that things are moving the way they should in the organization, managers have to continuously monitor the performance of the organization and compare this performance with the previously set standards. And if there are any deviations in the path, or if the organization has not been able to achieve the set standard, then where are the limitations? So the manager has to take corrective actions to get the organization back on track. Now, there are certain roles that the managers play. In the late 1960s, Henry Mintzberg, he identified 10 managerial roles, which are primarily your interpersonal role, informational role, and decisional role. So all managers, they are required to play these roles or to display this kind of behavior. So under the informational role, the manager uh, uh, monitors the external environment for receiving a wide variety of information. As a disseminator, he has to transmit this information to others. Now, as a spokesperson, the manager has to represent his department or the organization to the outsiders, maybe through speeches or it can be through reports. Then, under the interpersonal role, the manager as a figurehead has to perform certain ceremonial duties that are symbolic in nature, like receiving visitors, attending different functions, giving out awards. Then, as a leader, the manager has to direct and motivate his subordinates, his people, train them, advise them, influence them. Then, as a licensing in the licensing role, the manager has to maintain contacts not only within the organization but also with the outside world. Now, under the decisional role, the manager has to take decisions at certain points of time. Then, as an entrepreneur, the manager should constantly look for opportunities in the environment and seize those opportunities. He should be able to initiate new projects and identify areas of business development. As a disturbance handler, the manager should be able to take corrective actions in times of crisis or help in resolving conflicts amongst the staff. Then, as a resource allocator, the manager has to set schedules, make budgets, allocate resources to its optimal use. And as a negotiator, the manager has to represent his department or make sit with the union, suppliers, and other stakeholders for negotiating with them and come up with solutions which are which keep both the other party and the organization in the win-win situation. Now, talking about management skills, the manager should acquire certain skills in order to be effective. Broadly, there are three skills, namely technical skills, human skills, and conceptual skills. What are technical skills? Now, these skills encompass the ability to apply specialized knowledge or expertise, as we say. Now, when we talk about professionals like doctors, engineers, they gain technical skills through extensive formal education. Now, the human skills. The human skills are equally important. What are human skills? The manager should have the ability to understand people with whom he is working, communicate with the people, motivate them, and support them both individually and in groups. Thirdly, the conceptual skills. Now, these skills are considered higher level skills, which usually come through experience. So, the conceptual skills means that the manager should be able to analyze and diagnose complex situations. He should be able to connect the dots and look at the situation from the larger perspective. He should be able to identify alternative solutions for addressing the problem and execute the plans. So these conceptual skills are very important in today's world and every manager is required to acquire them. Now, talking about interpersonal skills, why are they so important at the workplace? Technical skills are important, but they are not enough to succeed in management. Now, traditionally, when we talk about, let's say, until the 1980s, the emphasis was more on acquiring, quantitative skills or technical skills. The focus was more on economics, on finance, on accounting. and the human knowledge or the human skills were not considered so important. But later, in the past few decades, businesses have realized that understanding human behavior is equally important, and it adds to managers' effectiveness in dealing with day-to-day problems in the organization. Now, in a competitive and demanding workplace that you see in today's world, technical skills alone will not take you very far, and human skills will be will become very important for the managers. So now, as it is seen, when the manager they have human skills, they make the place more pleasant, and a pleasant workplace obviously attracts and is able to retain high performing and qualified employees. Now, again, research suggests that if the relationship between the co-workers and the supervisors is congenial, it is healthy relationship, then it leads to job satisfaction. There is lower stress level amongst the employees, and the intention to quit the organization is also low. And lastly, having human skills, interpersonal skills, also makes economic sense. It has seen that companies who have earned the reputation as being the best places to work have also performed well on the financial front. So, as you can see, there are many benefits to acquiring the human skills. Now, let's talk about organizational behavior. What is OB? OB is a field of study that investigates the impact that individuals, groups, and structures have on behavior within organizations for the purpose of applying such knowledge toward improving an organization's effectiveness. Now, as you can see in the definition, first thing is that OB is a distinct field of study with its own common body of knowledge. And secondly, there are OB studies three determinants of behavior, namely individuals, groups, and structures. That is, OB applies the knowledge that it has gained over the years about individuals, about groups, and about the structures, what effect the structures have on the behavior of people. And through this, it has acquired more and more information on how people behave in the organization, so that uh, uh, this knowledge can be helpful in improving the organization's effectiveness. Now, OB is not based on some, the theories are not based on some intuition or gut instincts. The OB follows a very systematic and scientific approach. And over the years, research in OB has led to, evidence-based theories that have attributed to the different causes and effects between the different relationships. So now, as you can see, that OB helps to understand, predict, and influence behavior. Now, OB, the scientific study of behavior, OB helps in the scientific study of behavior, and it helps us to understand why people behave the way they do in the organization. So there are different topics that deal that the OB deals with, and which helps us to understand why people are behaving in a particular way, or why they have certain values, or why do they lead a particular lifestyle. So OB helps us to understand that behavior. Then it also helps us to predict behavior. Now, OB assumes that behavior is not random. There is some fundamental consistency which allows us to predict behavior. And lastly, OB not only helps us to understand and predict behavior, but it also helps us to influence behavior. Now, for example, if the boss is trying to encourage its workers to adopts a new information technology, then OB gives those tools to the manager how he can influence the behavior of the people so that they feel encouraged to adopt new ways, new technologies. So OB helps us to understand, predict, and influence behavior. Now, there are certain disciplines that have contributed to the field of OB. First is psychology. Now, psychology is a science that seeks to measure, explain, and sometimes change the behaviors of humans and other animals. It has contributed OB in a very extensive way. There are many topics and concepts that you will study in OB, like learning, perception, personality, emotions, organizational culture. All these have been derived from the field of psychology. Then social psychology. Social psychology focuses on people's influence on one another, how people influence the behavior of other people, and in turn they are influenced by their behavior. So again in OB, we study about group behavior, we study about conflicts, how conflicts arise, how conflicts can be resolved, what are the ways in coping with stress due to conflicts, and change management. Thirdly, political science. Now, political science is a branch that deals with politics in theory and practice and analyzes various political systems and political behaviors. Now, this particular branch has contributed to OB in understanding the dynamics of power and politics within the organization. And fourth, we have sociology. Now, what is sociology? It studies people in relation to their social environment or culture. Now, it has contributed to organizational culture, organization theory, structure, power, conflict, and communication. All these topics, they have been derived from the field of sociology. So, and lastly, we have anthropology. Again, it has impacted the field of OB. Now, through anthropology, what is anthropology? It is the study of societies to learn about how people behave in a certain society, what are their activities. And this particular branch has helped OB in understanding that why people differ in their ways when they are brought up in a specific culture. So why there are differences in national cultures. So that is how these different disciplines have contributed to the field of OB. Now let's talk about how OB emerged as a field of study. Now, the early pioneers in the field of management, such as Henry Fayol, Frederick Taylor, Henry Ford, they all emphasized that the purpose of the organization was to get the work done in specialized machine-like functions. Now, they ignored the human dimension and let it play a very minor role in comparison to hierarchical structures, specialization, management functions of planning and controlling, and so on. Now, however, there were business leaders, academicians, and the outbreak of World War II, which led to the surge of interest in human relations movement and the legalization of human management relations. So the emergence of OB can be traced back to human relations movement, stimulated by Hawthorne experiments during the 1920s. Now, the extensive experiments that were conducted by behavioral scientists highlighted the importance of human factor in management. Now, since the Hawthorne studies are recognized as a starting point for the field of organizational behavior, let me just briefly explain you about the experiments that occurred, that were conducted at Hawthorne Works of Western Electric Company near Chicago. Now, the first experiment called the illumination study. Now, these Hawthorne experiments were started in 1924. And this initial illumination study attempted to examine the relationship between light intensity on the shop floor of manual work sites and employee productivity. So, what did the experiment do? It was looking at the impact of the intensity of light on the productivity of the workers. Now, a test group and a control group were used. The test group initially showed no increase or decrease in output with increase or decrease in illumination. That means the test group where the experimental changes were made. So when the light was increased or when it was decreased, there was no change in the productivity level of the workers in the initial phase. The control group had no such experimental changes. That means the light was kept, the intensity of the light was kept constant. And the group output increased by the same amount as the test group. So, in the later phases, the output of the test group increased, and the amount it increased was equivalent to the amount that increased in the control group, where no such experimental changes were made. So, in subsequent phases, the level of the light was brought down to such a low point where the workers could hardly see, but still productivity increased. Now, this result was very baffling for the researchers. They could not understand why productivity was increasing. Obviously, there was some variable which was not being controlled, which led to the increase in output. But what was that variable? The researchers could not understand. So, the results of this initial illumination study provided impetus for further study of human behavior in the workplace. So, the second experiment, called the relay room experiment, was followed by the illumination studies. Now, in the relay room experiment, again the test group was selected, and here the operators, they assembled the relay switches. Now, the study tried to test specific variables such as a length of workday, rest breaks, method of payment, etc. Now, in this experiment, the researchers were trying to see what these specific variables had effect on the productivity of the workers. Now, again, each test period produced higher productivity, even when the workers were subjected to the original conditions of the experiment. Now, the researchers concluded that again something was still not being controlled that was causing change in the dependent variable, that is the productivity or the output of the workers. So, the third experiment was conducted, called the bank wiring room. Now, here again, the group was placed in a separate room, but there was one change. Now, this time the researchers, they placed an observer and an interviewer for collecting data for the study. And for this purpose, they selected the regular department supervisor, whose task was to maintain order and control. Now, the results of the study were opposite to those of the relay room experiment. There was no continual increase in productivity in this experiment. Rather, output was restricted by the bank wirers. Even when the incentive system dictated that the more a worker produced, the more money he would earn. Yet, all workers restricted output due to fear of social ostracism, name calling by other members of the group. So, what were the implications of these Hawthorne studies? Now, after collecting data and analyzing the data, so the researchers, they discussed with each other. And in discussing these Hawthorne studies, the researchers found the reasons that the workers gave for the preference of for their preference. So, first was a small group. Second, type of supervision. Third, earnings. Fourth, novelty of the situation. Fifth, interest in the experiment. Fifth, interest in the experiment. And sixth, attention received in the test room. Now, it is important to note here that the last three areas, they are associated with the famous Hawthorne effect that we call it. Many social scientists imply that the increase in the relay room productivity was due to the fact that the workers, they were receiving special attention because they were placed in a separate room rather than in a regular department. They were working in a separate room. So they felt very special, and they felt that the special attention was being given to them. So that is one cause of increased productivity. And secondly, the workers, they enjoyed working on a novel and interesting experiment. Now, these three variables were largely ignored initially. And these three variables, called the Hawthorne effects, were very, they had a profound impact in understanding human behavior. But again, the first three variables, like your small group and type of supervision and earnings, also had impact on the behavior of the people. Now, in the bank wiring experiment, the group was being monitored closely by the supervisors. So that was one thing which was impacting their productivity. And even when incentives was being given to them for increasing their productivity, yet the workers, they restricted the output. So why was that? Because this was because they were working in a small groups, and the dynamics of group was coming into play. So the workers were under social pressure from the other members of the organization that if they increase the output, the management would give them more and more targets. So that is why they restricted the output, and others followed suit, just because of the fear of social ostracism and name calling by other members. So all these Hawthorne experiments are greatly recognized as the starting point for the academic field of organizational behavior. And this is how the factor of human skills, or studying human behavior, was considered an important part of management. Thank you.